Imagine a high-stakes chess match playing out in the full glare of the public eye. Every single move watched, every accusation turned up to 11. How does a powerful figure, right in the middle of that storm, try to, well, reset the board, to set the record straight while history is still being written? Welcome to our deep dive.
Right.
Today, we're not just looking at a book. We're taking apart a masterclass in shaping a narrative. We're diving into William P. Barr's One Damn Thing After Another, not really to debate the politics.
Yeah, not the politics itself.
Right, but to figure out the strategic choices Barr made in crafting his own story. Our mission is to kind of extract the rhetorical blueprint behind his memoir, understand his purpose, and then gauge how effective it actually is in today's, let's face it, fiercely polarized world.
And just so you know, you are experiencing a unique two-host AI conversation powered by Google's NotebookLM for deeper, more dynamic book analysis.
And this book, it's a really fascinating case study for exactly that. William Barr, well, he served as Attorney General under two very different presidents, George H.W. Bush
and Donald J. Trump. So that puts him right at the center of American law and politics for decades, really. He wrote this memoir after leaving the Trump administration, and he's directly taking on those, well, intense events that marked that time.
Things he saw as media misrepresentation.
Exactly. That and the growing cultural divides in the U.S., he tackles it all head on.
So it's much more than just, here's what happened. It's a deliberate response, a narrative strategy.
Right, absolutely. The book covers his whole career, from big moments like Iran-Contra right up to the complexities surrounding the 2020 election. But underneath it all, it's really his detailed explanation of his legal philosophy.
And the challenges he faced.
Yeah, the immense challenges of trying to maintain integrity, uphold the rule of law in environments that are just incredibly politicized. It's his argument for how he navigated all that pressure.
Okay, so to really get how Barr is shaping his story, we need to look at it rhetorically, like dissecting a speech or maybe a lawyer's closing argument. We can use a framework sometimes called SOAP Stone. It helps us ask, who is speaking, what's the context, who's the audience, why are they saying it, what's the subject, and what's the tone? So let's start with the speaker, William P. Barr himself.
Well, Barr as the speaker, he brings huge credibility right out of the gate. His long career, especially being AG under two presidents, that immediately paints him as an experienced insider.
Someone who's seen it all, basically.
Pretty much. Someone with firsthand knowledge of the highest levels of government and law. That history alone gives his words, a certain weight.
And the reason for writing it now, it wasn't just a trip down memory lane, was it? Seems very timed, very strategic.
It absolutely feels strategic. This isn't just looking back fondly. It's a direct response to the firestorm of public criticism and debate about his actions, especially during the Trump presidency. He's wading into ongoing arguments about media portrayals, the rule of law itself, justice in these polarized times, particularly after the 2020 election. It's definitely an attempt to clarify, defend, and, influence how people think about it now.
Right. So given that context, who is he actually trying to talk to? Who's the main audience here?
Primarily, I'd say politically engaged Americans, maybe especially those leaning conservative or who are already a bit skeptical of mainstream media takes.
Okay.
But he's also clearly addressing his critics and maybe the broader public, too. He wants to, in his words, set the record straight. It's a wide net, but you can see where the main anchors are.
Which brings us straight to his purpose. More than just telling his side. What's Barr really trying to achieve with this book?
His purpose is pretty clear, and it's got layers. He definitely wants to defend his decisions, his actions as Attorney General. He wants to correct what he sees as major media distortions. And he wants to comment on these bigger cultural and political fights that are still going on. So, yes, inform, but also persuade. Justify his perspective. He's looking for understanding, maybe even some sympathy for the choices he made.
And the subject matter that fuels all this?
Well, it technically covers his whole career, but the real focus, the real weight, is definitely on those supercharged political events he was involved in, especially during the Trump years. The narrative is all tangled up with specific controversies, legal fights, and the, intense public scrutiny that came with them.
Okay, lastly for this framework, the tone. How does he actually sound when you read it? Is it that objective, lawyerly voice throughout, or does it fluctuate?
It fluctuates quite a bit, actually. The tone is often remarkably candid, maybe even impassioned. You really feel his frustration with what he calls misrepresentation.
You can sense the irritation.
Oh, definitely. And at times, there are these really strong outbursts, like against militant secularism or labeling opponents radical. So it swings, between that measured, analytical, sort of objective tone you'd expect from a former AG, and then this fervent, sometimes a quite emotional culture warrior kind of stance. That back and forth is really key to understanding his whole rhetorical game here.
That swing is really interesting. It makes you wonder how he builds his credibility, his ethos through the book. How does he convince you he's being unbiased, even with that passion?
He works hard at it. He really highlights his decades of experience, constantly repeats his commitment to applying legal standards fairly, the whole no politics and justice idea.
Right.
He even points to his initial hesitation about serving under Trump as proof of his integrity, his independence. And beyond that, he definitely uses his identity, conservative Catholic, deep legal background, his past roles to build that trustworthy foundation. It's a very deliberate construction of this principled, seasoned figure.
But it's not all just logic and precedent, is it? There's a strong emotional undercurrent, the pathos. Where does that really show up?
Oh, the emotional appeals are huge. He taps into that deep frustration over media fabrication, as he calls it, painting this picture of being unfairly attacked.
Trying to connect with readers who feel the same way.
Exactly. He brings up concerns about threats to American values, to liberty. You feel his irritation at unfair treatment, maybe a bit of nostalgia for, more civil times. And those passionate criticisms we mentioned, sometimes escalating to terms like Maoist for opposition groups.
Wow.
That language isn't accidental. It's meant to create this strong emotional connection with readers who share those anxieties, making them more open to his arguments.
And then there's the logos, the logic. Given his background, it does often read like a lawyer laying out their case, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The whole memoir feels structured like a comprehensive legal defense. Barr lays out detailed reasoning, presents what he frames as evidence straight from his own experiences.
Right.
He spends a lot of time critiquing other narratives, especially media ones, and gives these detailed, rational-sounding justifications for his big decisions, like his resignation after finding no significant election fraud, or his reasoning on policy stuff, impeachment, how he handled protests. He's aiming to make his case with facts, timelines, logical arguments, almost like he's presenting to a jury.
It's fascinating how these appeals, ethos, pathos, logos, they all weave together with his specific rhetorical tricks. Let's get into some of those. What about his word choice, his diction?
Barr's diction is quite a mix. He can switch really smoothly between very formal legal language, exactly what you'd expect.
Sure.
And then suddenly use really colloquial, almost blunt terms. Like he uses CYA explanations, cover your.
Yeah. Very direct.
Very direct, very informal. And that's right alongside Latin phrases or complex rhetorical questions. This mix does a few things. It punches up his points, it shows off his learning, but it also lets him connect more directly, drop the formality when he wants to be sharp or maybe more relatable.
And the structure of the book itself, the title One Damn Thing After Another, that sounds like a structural clue right there.
It really is, and it's quite effective. The book moves mostly chronologically, sort of episode by episode, from his personal background into the big political crises. It perfectly mirrors that title.
Creates a feeling of constant pressure.
Exactly. A relentless flow of events. It helps frame his actions not as these isolated choices, but as reactions to this nonstop barrage of challenges and controversies. That structure itself can build a kind of understanding, maybe even sympathy, from the reader.
That makes a lot of sense. And speaking of specific bits, I remember reading that funny anecdote about him telling the CIA he could play the bagpipes. That seemed like such an odd, humanizing detail.
That's a perfect example. His occasional but very strategic use of self-awareness or irony. That bagpipe story, pitching himself to the CIA, it serves a real rhetorical function.
How so?
Well, it breaks up all the heavy legal and political talk. It injects a bit of unexpected humor. It makes him seem more, human, less like some detached legal automaton. In a book packed with serious arguments, moments like that create a different kind of connection, one that pure logic just can't achieve.
This deep dive, like all our explorations, is really about giving you the tools to look critically at these complex narratives. Understanding how someone tells their story is just as important as what they say. And speaking of critical thinking and reflection, that's exactly what we foster over at Mindful Moments, our YouTube channel. It offers AI book analysis specifically designed to spark reflection and rational thought. Now bring it back to Barr's memoir. If we pull all these rhetorical pieces together, the appeals, the strategies, how effective do you think he actually is in achieving what he set out to do?
Well, he definitely succeeds in laying out a very detailed, very personal defense of his actions, his viewpoint.
Yeah.
For readers who are already kind of leaning his way or who are looking for an alternative to the mainstream story, he gives them a lot to work with, a ton of information, justification. It's a strength for sure. He really invites you to reconsider the common narratives from his insider perspective.
But does that persuasion work for everyone? What are maybe the limitations of that approach?
That's where it gets tricky. That impassioned tone we talked about, the frequent detours into broader cultural critiques that can definitely turn off readers who are more skeptical or maybe more liberal.
Right.
If you don't already share his basic worldview, those parts might actually undermine his persuasiveness across the whole political spectrum. That strong culture warrior element appeals to some, but it's definitely a barrier for others.
So thinking about the audience again, how well does the book land? Is it appropriate for who it seems aimed at and maybe beyond?
It connects most strongly with conservatives, I think, and people really interested in the weeds of legal processes or high-stakes political memoirs. For that core group, it's very appropriate, probably quite convincing.
But for others?
For a wider audience, those more polemical parts, the sharp edges, they can be a real drawback. It might make the book feel less accessible, less universally persuasive than maybe he hoped.
It sounds like Barr really tries to show his reasoning throughout, giving these detailed accounts. But looking at it from the outside, are there places where critics question the consistency of his narrative?
There are, yes. While he presents a lot of detailed reasoning, some analysts point to moments where maybe the consistency of his arguments could be debated, particularly around sensitive topics like race or maybe certain responses to protests. And you have to remember, the book relies very heavily on Barr's own testimony, which is valuable. It's an insider's view, but it's also inherently subjective. It's a common critique of memoirs by public figures. They can sometimes seem self-justifying or accused of telling only part of the story.
So if we tie this all together, what's the main takeaway here? What does one damn thing after another tell us about rhetoric, especially from someone like Barr?
I think the book is a really pertinent example of memoir functioning as strategic rhetoric. Barr expertly uses his personal credibility, his ethos, and builds this detailed, reasoned defense, all happening within this incredibly partisan atmosphere. His specific choices, that blend of careful legal argument, strong emotional appeals, and that distinct, sometimes combative style, they really show both his skills as a veteran lawyer making a case, and also the real difficulties, the limitations of trying to persuade people in today's deeply divided public square.
Okay, so let's quickly recap the key insights from this deep dive. We've explored how William Barr used his memoir not just to recount events, but really to strategically shape how people see them. He mixed logical arguments with strong emotional appeals.
A powerful combination.
And we've touched on the real challenge of persuading anyone across divides in our current environment. Understanding how the story is built, not just what it says, is so vital for making sense of things today.
Absolutely. And these are the kinds of insights you get when you move past just the summary and really analyze how a compelling narrative works.
For more deep dives like this, and other book analyses that encourage reflection and rational thought, definitely check out Mindful Moments on our YouTube channel. And you can find more of our podcasts and detailed analyses wherever you normally listen. Now, if you want the full, in-depth book summary of one damn thing after another, just click the link you see on screen. Please subscribe to our channel, share this deep dive if you know others who love to learn, and if you're interested, you can also purchase the book using the link provided.
It leaves you thinking, doesn't it? In an age where every personal story seems to become a public argument, how do we, as thoughtful listeners, get better at telling the difference between genuine insight and, well, carefully crafted rhetoric? And what's our responsibility in that whole process?